All right, folks, welcome. It's good to have you here creating what it is to be a more effective leader. So, thank you for being here. Today's webinar is dedicated to the secret behind high performing teams. And, I like saying the secret, but guess what? It's not so secret. And I'm going to reveal it to you today. The secret behind high performing team is the theme of the webinar today. Now, teams, companies, you name it. If you were an alien, if you were an alien and you were looking at people and companies, what would you see? You would see people walking around, doing what they do, but mostly you'd see human beings talking. So the first deal is that in organizations, people talk. And in organizations, people have relationships. The strength of the relationships is completely dependent on the way they talk. So to be an effective leader is to be someone who's concerned for how the people in your company talk and how that talking strengthens the relationships.
Still
Now,
there.
mostly when people think about that, they say, well, gosh, it's all about effective communication then. And I say, yes, it is all about effective communication. But effective communication has nothing to do with how people, like the words you say. The first thing it has to do with is where are the words you're saying coming from? What's giving you the word you say? And when I say you, I'm talking about people in your organization, the people in your company, your team members. Whatever they say, it's coming from somewhere. And that place it's coming from is someplace they're not aware of. So this webinar is designed to give you access to where the speaking of human beings come from. In other words, if your speaking is coming from somewhere and you don't know, then it's going to take some serious emotional intelligence to get to where your speaking is coming from without making yourself wrong. So the first place we have to look at neuroscience, and we also have to look at ontology. Neuroscience says this: the words that are coming out of my mouth, the words that come out of your mouth when you speak on a team, before you can even say them, they come out. So it's not like you're thinking which word to use. Are you following? When you're speaking, you're not thinking which word to use. The words are coming out of your mouth. They're following an intention. That intention, conscious or unconscious, is what's using you, giving you your words. So one has to be keenly aware of how the brain works to figure out how to communicate more effectively. So the brain works this way. When I think a thought, it generates a feeling. That feeling triggers the brain to secrete chemicals. Whether it's anger or love or whatever it is, that chemical then generates my body feeling that way. And by the time I feel that way, I'm now feeling that way and thinking that it's not my thought that really gave me the feeling. It's my feeling that's giving me my thought. So there's this cycle and this loop that your thinking and your feeling gets into that leaves human beings trapped into a cycle where thinking and feeling are one and the same. Thinking and feeling become one and the same. And you're there trapped into that cycle. And human beings don't know that. Now, once you're aware of that, you can actually have an opportunity to take a break from it. If my thinking gives me my feeling, and if my feeling generates in turn my thinking, and I get stuck into this loop, then if I can take a break from it, I can disrupt it. That's the first place where you gain power into creating high-performing teams, leaving your people equipped with that opportunity to take a break from that cycle that their brain generates. The second piece, so we now covered just a little bit of neuroscience. Let's cover a little bit of the ontology, how you are as a human being. When somebody's stuck into that cycle of feeling and thinking and feeling and thinking, they become that feeling and they become that thinking. Instead of saying, I have anger, people are just plain old angry. Instead of saying, I have joy or happiness, people are plain old happy. Instead of saying, I have some resentment, people are plain old resentful. And when I am that way, and the feeling I'm feeling comes with the emotion it comes with, and I feel it in my body, I feel it all over the place, I have no choice but to defend it as if it's the truth. I am feeling that way, and therefore it's you that's the cause, not me. So in that sense, you'll find that many leaders think that performance issues stem from strategy failures, but it's often the relationships and the communication failures that leave them there. So I'm going to create 5 assertions with you that will give you access to both the neuroscience and the ontology. They're structured in language that's easy for you to remember, and you can tell them to your teams and your vendors and anybody. So the first one goes like this, and it's tied into how the brain works. You don't see with your eyes. You see with your brain. So when I walk into the office and I see a team member and something gets triggered, what that means is that my brain constructs reality based on past experience, not the objective truth. So I don't see a team member sitting at their computer. Maybe I see a lazy person. And how that impacts leadership is that I end up making decisions based on that perception, not on the facts. And it leaves me blind. So here's a practical step, very practical. Pause and observe. Stop before reacting. And when you stop before reacting, you shift control from the limbic system of the brain to the prefrontal cortex, leaving you thinking so you can make better decisions. That's the first assertion. You don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. The second assertion is this. You don't see what your brain sees. You see its interpretations. And what this means is that your brain filters and edits information based on unconscious biases. Your team members are doing that all the time. That's how the brain works. And if you want a high-performing team, then people have to not only stop reacting to their interpretations, the interpretation their brains make, they have to somehow connect to the fact that they're not seeing what their brain sees, they're only seeing the interpretations. That's the second assertion. The third assertion is your brain's interpretation triggers chemicals and emotional responses. And what this means is that your brain releases these chemicals based on the interpretations, which then creates the emotions. There's a chemical called cortisol. It triggers stress. There's another one called oxytocin. It triggers trust. Another one called dopamine. It triggers motivation. Now, how does that impact leadership? Leaders who don't understand emotional triggers create stress-driven workplaces. How? Because the moment I step into the environment and I dive into having a conversation with my employee or my team member that's anchored in resolving the emotion escalates. The environment becomes stressful. Nothing happens beyond that. So, practical step to manage your brain chemistry. Reduce cortisol stress by fostering psychological safety. And psychological safety means through positive reinforcement, through feedback loops, give people the opportunity to feel safe, to express themselves, to feel safe, to be just the way they are. Because assertion number 4 says, your interpretation becomes your reality. Your team members are sitting there. They feel a certain way. They're not seeing what their brain sees. They're seeing the interpretation. The interpretation then becomes their reality because the feeling makes it so real. And what that means is that the emotion triggered by your brain's interpretation shape your leadership approach. You lead not from where you're standing, from your intention. You're leading from the interpretation. And the interpretation gives you your leadership approach. How does that impact your leadership? If you believe your team's underperforming, your behavior will reinforce that perception. Practical step, lead with self-awareness. Recognize your emotional patterns. Journaling, self-reflection, and structured feedback. That improves leadership awareness and adaptability. And in the end, assertion number 4 says, you defend your reality, even if it's based on misinterpretation. And what this means is that leaders will cling to familiar narratives, even when they hold team back. I will cling to what's familiar to me, even if it's holding my team back. And how it impacts my leadership is that I become defensive. And when I'm defensive, I resist feedback. I fail to course correct, and that weakens trust within the team. Practical step, again, is to continue to encourage psychological safety. Ask, listen, affirm. Create a team culture where people feel safe to challenge me, to challenge ideas without fear or backlash. I want you to know that I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One, it's good to be in conversation. I enjoy being in conversation. And if you're going to spend your time, your lunchtime, to have 30 to 45 minutes with me, I want you to walk away with something real. So it will be just like this every time. I'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes to create an idea, to create a context for a conversation. And then I'll ask you to engage in that conversation with me. So you can walk away with something that's real for you. And in less than 15 to 20 minutes, you'll walk away with something real and you'll go practice it in your life. So now you don't just walk away with it theoretically. You walk away with it as a real practice, but you can't walk away with it as a practice until you say it. All right?
All right, guys.
Until next time.